Gustav Holst's The Planet Suite is one of his most famous pieces he ever composed. Surprisingly, this piece was inspired during Holst's holiday with his friends Balfour Gardiner, Arnold Baggs, and Clifford Baggs. Now, Clifford was an author, and when he was discussing about astrology, it intrigued the host's interest. Later, Clifford commented that Holst had become a remarkably skilled interpreter of horoscopes. The following are the 7 movements of the planet's suite. Mars, the bringer of war. Venus, the bringer of peace. Mercury, the winged messenger. Jupiter, bringer of jollity. Saturn, the bringer of old age. Uranus, the magician. And lastly, Neptune, the mystic. Originally, Holst's idea was to write it in original order, which was Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. But he thought that Mars brought a more dramatic beginning and drew the listeners in. So Holst put Mars first, replacing it with Mercury. First, the planets begin with Mars, the bringer of war. This movement is marked as allegro and in a relentless 5/4 ostinato. It begins menacingly quiet, like 2 armies preparing to confront each other. The music builds up to a quadruple forte, a dissonant climax. Holst commands the strings to hit the strings with the back of their bows, known as the technique collegno. Mars is often thought to portray the horrors of war and brutality, since it was composed before World War I started. Short comments, harmonic dissonances abound, often resulting from clashes between moving chords and static pedal points, where he compares to resembling effects with the end of Stravinsky's Firebird. The brutality of Mars ends, followed by the tranquility of Venus. This movement begins with a slow adagio in 4/4 times. According to Holst's daughter Imogen Holst, Venus has to try and bring the right answer to Mars. The movement begins with a solo horn theme, later accompanied by flutes and oboes. The second theme is bestowed to a solo violin singing a beautiful and soft melody. The music proceeds serenely with oscillating chords up from flutes and harps, with an adoration of the Celesta. Between the opening adagio and the central largo, there is a flowing and lyrical andante section in 3/4 with a violin melody. Following the tranquility of Venus is the elasticity of Mercury, the winged messenger. Mercury is in 6/8 and marked vivace throughout. This movement is essentially pictorial in idea. This movement, the last of the 7 to be written, contains Holst's first experiments of bitonality. He juxtaposes melodic fragments in B flat to E major in a fast-moving scherzo. Instruments that are prominently featured in this movement include solo violin, high-pitched harp, flute, and glockenspiel. Those in despair become happy, for Jupiter, bringer of jollity, has arrived. In this movement, Holst portrays Jupiter's characteristic abundance of life and vitality with buoyant and exuberant music. Nobility and generosity are allegedly characteristics born to Jupiter. In the middle section portrays these traits very well. The opening of this movement includes a notation of allegro giocoso in 2/4 time. The broad melody in the middle section in 3/4 time is marked andante maestoso, which Holst marks to be taken at half speed. The movement ends with a triple forte quaver chord for the whole entire orchestra. The jollity of Jupiter are not to last, because it is followed by the despair of Saturn, the bringer of old age. This movement was Holst's favorite movement of the suite. People described it as a slow processional, which rises to a frightening climax before fading away as if into the outer reaches of space. This movement begins with 4/4 time and remains slow throughout, with short bursts of animato in the first part of the switch. It is heavy, including a part sounding like a funeral march. Apart from the timpani, there is no percussion, except for tubular bells at climatic points. Flutes, bassoons, and harps begin the piece with a theme suggesting a ticking clock. The solemn melody is introduced by trombones, Holst's main instrument, and taken up by the entire orchestra. The music later dies away and ends quietly. The magic of Uranus begins. People describe this as a clumsy dance which gradually gets out of hand, and not unlike Duca's sorcerer's apprentice, until, with what seems like a magic wand, all abruptly swept away into a far distance. This movement begins with a tremendous four-note brass motif marked allegro. The music proceeds in a series of merry pranks with occasional interjections of 9/4. It builds up to a quadruple forte climax with a prominent and prestigious organ glissando. After that, the music suddenly drops to a pianissimo, lento, before alternating quick and slow sections, bringing the movement into a pianissimo conclusion. The piece ends with the mysteries and bafflements of Neptune, the mystic. This movement is slow throughout in a slow, quiet, swaying, irregular meter, opening with flutes joined by piccolos and oboes, harps and celesta. Holst makes much use of the dissonance in this movement. Before the premiere, his colleague said that a bar where the brass plays the chords of E minor and G sharp minor together would be frightening. Holst agreed and said it made him shudder while writing it. But what are you to do when they come like that? As the movement develops, the orchestra is joined by an offstage female chorus singing wordless lines. When hearing this, people felt that this movement made no logical sense at all, because it was unusual for orchestral works at that time, although Claude Debussy had used the same device in his nocturnes. The orchestra falls silent, while the unaccompanied chorus is left to bring the work into a pianissimo conclusion. Holst wrote of the 1918 premiere under Bolt. Even those listeners who had studied the score for months were taken aback by the unexpected clamor of Mars. During Jupiter, the charwomen working in the corridors put down their scrubbing brushes and began to dance. In Saturn, the isolated listeners in the dark, half-empty hall felt themselves growing older every bar. But it was the end of Neptune that was unforgettable, with the hidden chorus of women's voices growing fainter and fainter in the distance until the imagination knew no difference between sound and silence. Remember I told you about the rearrangement of the order? Well, let's expand. If we take Jupiter as the center, each planet is a mirror image of the other. Confused? Well, don't worry, I will elucidate. Mars is young and beautiful, while Neptune is mystic and old. Venus is peaceful and beautiful, while Uranus is exciting and aerobatic. Mercury is light, and while Saturn is heavy. This suite is absolutely amazing, both epic and beautiful at the same time. Remember to listen to this whole suite in its entirety, and subscribe, like, and spread away. See you all next time, everyone.